Something that we need to be aware of as designers in a game is making sure that we keep our frame rate as high as possible. And so we've talked about, textures and making sure that our textures are the way they need to be and the sizes are correct so we don't use up too much memory in a material. The same thing can happen when you're dealing with models or assets. You might say, well, I've got a scene where I have a car and I go out and I search for a car model because I don't want to model it myself, and the car model is absolutely immense. It's 35 or 40 meg file. I bring it in and it's this beautiful high quality automobile, but the engine has to load it up and has to keep displaying it throughout the gameplay, even though you may be, say, 100 yards away from it. It's still looking at an extremely high quality model sitting in the distance, and is taking up all of the memory attributes and slows your overall frame rate down. So one of the things that we deal with and we learn to work with and utilize to our best advantage is something called level of detail. We call it LOD. And what they do in LOD is you start out with a high poly model, and then as you slowly move away from an object, it reduces in quality until by the time you're a long way away from it, it's just basically a shell of what it was originally, because you don't need to see all that detail if you're 100 yards away from something. If I have a high quality model and I'm standing next to it, it's important that I see all the detail. But as I move away from an object, I don't need to see as much detail. So what Unreal Engine will do is seamlessly substitute a lower poly model in place of the high poly model, and you have complete control over that, and we're going to show you that here in this scene. And I provided the files for you out there on Canvas and in the Google Drive. What we're going to do is I started with an empty level. I created a new blank project, or if you're working with some of your other projects, you can just create a new level. You can go up to File and New Level, and then what you want to do is you just want to select if you do this, you have a choice. You want to just go with default on this one, just because you don't really need anything else. And I don't really have any textures in this one because I don't need textures. I'm going to create a couple of textures just to make sure that my LODs are working correctly, and I'm going to do that, and it's fairly easy to do. So that's what we're going to show you how to do. And then also we're going to show you how to adjust the game engine. So it substitutes models the way you need them substituted. Depending upon how far away you are, they'll work. I'm going to show you something here with a fountain model, and I've also provided you with a car model and its LODs, and I'm going to let you do that on your own. That's going to be the assignment that you turn in. So we'll go from there. So here's what I'm going to do to start. I'm just going to go down, I'm going to right click down here, and I'm going to import a model, and the first thing I'm going to get here is I've got one called Fountain LOD 0. Now, when you're dealing with LODs, the way that they work is that it is an LOD 0 is the high poly model, 1 in this case is a medium poly model, and then 2 is a low poly model. And you'll see up here in the cars I've got 0, 1, 2, 3, and 0, 1, 2, and 3, and what that is I have actually 4 levels of cars in here, and that's the one that you're going to download and do on your own. So the first one I'm going to download here is going to be the Fountain LOD 0.fbx. Now, when it comes in, it's going to ask me some things. It probably for you is going to be closed up and look something like that. Notice that it is not skeletal, so it shouldn't be checked. You want to make sure that that is not checked. And I'm not going to import any materials or textures because I'm going to create my own on this one, and it's kind of a hassle to do that. I like to have a little bit more control over that when I'm doing it. So I'm just going to click import, and it's going to bring it in and drop it into my content browser down here. Now, it is a relatively high poly model, so it takes a few seconds for it to come in. And there you see, I've got it down here, and if I double click and open it up, and I'll pull this thing over here, it's auto-generated a collision box, which is fine. I'm not really too concerned about that. You'll also notice that the material looks kind of crappy on that. I didn't really take any time to put any real UVW mapping on that, so the textures would look good because I'm just going to use a solid color texture just for this test. Obviously, if you've got a high poly model, either you've downloaded it from a place like TurboSquid or you've modeled it yourself, you already have a texture on it, and you already have the UVW mapping done the way that you want it to be done. But in this particular case, I don't care. And like I said, as far as the collision goes, collision probably isn't really important for this, but I've got it on there anyway. I let it do it. It is an example of an auto-generated collision, and so it's, rather than, I could probably simplify this by just making it maybe cylindrical, or create it. I can probably get better control over it, but for the sake of this particular test, I'm not even going to worry about it. In fact, I think what I'll do, I'll leave it on just so I can show you some things later on. All right, so there it is. There we have it. Now, over here in the right side of the panel of your asset here for Fountain LOD, you're going to see a section that says LOD 0, and this is what this is. And then it's got a blank or an empty material slot. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and create a material really quickly for this. And while I'm doing that, I'm actually going to create the materials for the other two LODs I'm going to bring in. So let's do that really quickly. I'm going to right click. I'm going to open up a material, create a new material. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name that. I'm going to make these a little bit bigger so we can see them down here. There we go. I'm going to name that M for material _ LOD 0. And the reason I'm going to do that is because that's going to be applied to my model LOD 0. Then I'm going to double click and I'm going to open this up. Now, we are going to be talking about materials next week, and we're going to go a little bit more into this next week, but this is an easy one for you to do, so I'm really not too worried about you having to understand a whole lot about this window. I sort of covered some basic material information. We're going to go into much more detail in some more videos, and we're going to show you all the different types of materials and what all of these things are in here. This is called the main node, and we'll show you all of the things that are in here and how we can work to create some really nice textures. But for right now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to move over here in this area. You're going to hold down the 3 on your numeric keyboard, and you're going to left click. Okay. This is going to create what we call a constant 3 vector. Now, there are a couple of things that we can use. I think in the earlier videos I showed you how to hold down the number 1 on your keyboard and to left click, and you got something that looked like this. These two are related. This is a 1 constant, or just call it a constant if you want to. This is a constant 3 vector. And the difference between them is this literally is just black and white, or shades of gray in between. But the two colors involved in this are black and white. This one contains 3 colors. You'll notice down here it just says 0. Up here it says 0, 0, 0. Those represent the RGB values of a color. Let me just select that and delete it because I don't need that anymore. So what we do with something like this is I'm just going to put a nice red color, I think, on my base LOD. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select over here where it says constant. I can type in values, or I can click on this little black bar and I can actually set a color. Well, in this particular case, I just want solid red, so I'm just going to highlight that, type in 1. Then I'm going to drag and wire that to base color. That's all it is. And I'm going to have a red material, and you can see the thing right here. It's a red material. I don't care whether it's shiny or not. This is just for demonstration purposes. And then I'm going to save that. Make sure you save it. And then I'm just going to click to close it. And what you'll see down here is you now have a model, and you now have an LOD 0. So if I open up my LOD again, now where you see this little section over here, what you can do is if you have a material selected inside of your content browser, all you have to do is come up here and click that arrow. You'll see it says use selected asset from content browser. You can do it this way, or you can check on the little magnifying glass, and it will allow you to search your content browser for something you want. That's a second way of doing it. A third way of doing it would be just to grab this and bring it up here and slide it and let go. And that would work as well. And you see it applies it there in my window, and that material is now applied to it. The third thing that you see over here, which is that little arrow, is a reset to base material. If I want to, I can just click that, and it resets it back to the way it was when it first came in. So if you already had something textured, and you brought it in and you thought, well, I accidentally imported the texture and the material and I'm really not happy with it, you can just click on this little thing, this little arrow right here, and delete whatever material is on it, and you go back to your very base untextured or unmaterialed selection. So I'm going to go ahead now and just grab that and put it up there on there again so it's got it, and then I'm going to save it. All right, so that's my LOD0. Now underneath that you'll see a little section that says LOD settings, and this is where we're going to go and we're going to get the LODs that represent lower poly models. Now over here on the left, you'll notice is it says LOD0. It has the current screen size, the current number of triangles. Now remember that if I look at this thing in wireframe, and it's kind of hard to see because of the color, but you'll notice everything is in triangles. Even if I zoom in really close, everything is in triangles. When you export a model out of a 3D program, it converts it into something called an editable mesh. An editable mesh is always comprised of triangles. Even if you modeled something and you don't have a triangle on it, you've modeled it in Max or Maya or Blender, you've built it out of polygons, which are four-sided objects, and you export it out, it is automatically changed to an editable mesh, and every polygon or every square is then cut in half and turned into triangles, because everything has to be triangulated for a game engine to see it. So in this particular case, there are 39,900 triangles. That's a fairly large model, so it can be quite large. It shows you the number of vertices over there also. A vertex, or the vertices, vertex is singular, vertices is plural, is everywhere you see an edge or a line that comes to a point. I can zoom in here and see if I guess those are probably still the best ones to see. Right there is a vertex. Right there is a vertex. Right there is a vertex, and right there is a vertex. Wherever these edges or lines dead end, that is a vert. So you'll see this one has 23,513 vertices. This is just an immense file. And you'll see when you do the car, it's even bigger. All right, let's turn wireframe back off and take a look at that. All right. So what we want to do is we want to go in and we want to bring in a lower poly model. So as I step away from it, it reduces the amount of polygons, the amount of vertices, the amount of triangles, and will seamlessly change, hopefully. So as I step away from it, it lowers the quality that has to be projected on screen. And the way we do that is under that little block that says LOD settings. So I have LOD group. I can actually go in and name a group if I want to. Like I can say, well, this is going to be, say, a large prop. So let me go ahead and put it under the category of large prop. All right, and they do have some base settings in there, and I've just overwritten those, but that's okay for this particular thing. You don't actually have to do anything here. If you want to leave it at none, that works just as well. It doesn't really matter. Okay, it's just a way of allowing you to keep things grouped together, because if you have a lot of objects, you can call them back up. You can display them on screen based upon their group names, things like that. When you're trying to, if you're searching a large environment for, say, all of your LOD objects, you can go in and isolate so only your LOD objects are on the screen and you can see how they're all working. It's just a way of you keeping your files organized. Underneath that, it says LOD import, and it says base LOD. Well, I've already got my base LOD. It's right there. So if I click on it, I can import my LOD level 1. And when you select this, what it's going to do is, you notice I didn't import any other models in here. So even though that this is going to be made up of 3 individual models, I don't import them all in here at the same time. If you do import them all in here, what happens is you have to go through a very long, involved process using Blueprint, which you haven't learned yet and aren't going to learn until after about week 9 or maybe week 8. We're going to get into blueprints. What you would have to do would be to construct a blueprint, which is a code-based, a visual coding-based solution And what you would do is you could say, well, at such and such a distance from that object, it goes invisible and another one appears. That's a really complicated way of doing it. This one works really easily. But if you're using individually placed objects, that's how you would have to do it. But you'll notice I only imported my LOD0. And you saw when I went to import it that there was an LOD1 and an LOD2 sitting out there waiting for me to call up. This is where we're going to do that. Import LOD level 1. It's going to ask me to go find it. There is my fountain LOD1, and I'm going to open it up. And it imports it, and it drops it in. And there is my LOD1. There is no material on it yet. Now I do have one more object to go, so let's get it right now. Base LOD, we will go down to import LOD level 2, and I will get my fountain LOD level 2. Now you'll notice what it automatically did was it assumes that you're using the same texture, and honestly what you can do, we're not doing it because we're not really dealing with the textures on this one per se, but what is true for LOD models or assets is also true for LOD materials. You can create lower resolution images that will go on a texture. So in this particular case, I'm just going to create I'm going to have 3 textures down there. I'll create 2 new ones to go along with this one. And I'm going to change the colors on them so I can actually see how this is changing as I back away from it. But it assumes here that I want the same material probably on LOD0 and LOD1, and then it gives me the opportunity to add another one on LOD2. So if you were working in Photoshop and you created you want a really, really high quality image on that one, so you made it 2048 by 2048 pixels, and you've created this really nice image and you put it on that fountain, and then as you back away from it, you really can't see all the fine details. Maybe the normals aren't necessary anymore, because remember, if you've got a material and you have a normal map in there and you have a diffuse map in there and you have maybe a specular or some other map that's located in that thing, which we're going to talk about again in the next set of videos, you really have a complicated and expensive material on a very high quality model. So maybe when you back 30 feet away from that, the normals aren't as important. It doesn't really matter that you can see the texture of maybe that's made out of concrete blocks, and they've been put together, and you can see the seams between them with the grout. Maybe you don't need to see that much detail when you back away from it. So you can create another material that doesn't really have that much detail in it, or you can start removing things like a shininess map or a normal 3D map, and you can get away from that stuff and just go with the texture. So the assumption here, again, going back to that, is that you want at least the same one on level 0 and level 1, and the opportunity to do a different one on level 2. I'm actually going to create a different one here, so I'm just going to delete that. I'll click that little button, and it will remove it. Or not. But I'll come back to that anyway, and you'll see that I can still replace that even though it's not resetting itself back to normal. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Now that I've got those 3 models are all in there, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to save that up, and I'm going to close it. And I'm going to take this material, and I need 2 more materials, one for each of those. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to duplicate, or you can hit Control W on your keyboard. And it's going to come up and it's going to name it LOD2. Well, I probably want that to be LOD1, so I'll just highlight that and change it. And then I'm going to duplicate that one, and that one will be LOD2. So I have 3 of them here that are all red. What I do is I will open up this one, I will click on this, and then over here I will just change that to 0, and then change the green here to 1, and I will have a green texture. Save that up, close it, come over to this one. I will do the same thing, except instead of red or green, it will be blue. Now, you don't actually, just so you know, you notice I save everything before I close it. It's just a habit I get into. There are times when you would come up here and say, well, I'm just going to close that window. I changed the color. I'm good over here. It will ask you to save it before you. If you don't, then it's going to lose all your changes. So just go ahead and click yes. It does the same thing. It saves it and it closes it. And there we go. All right, back to this little guy. So what I'm going to do, and I'll close this up just a little bit so we can see what's going on underneath it. All right, what I'm going to do is LOD is good. LOD1, I'm going to put the green material on it. So if I select it and I click that button, it turns red, or turns green, excuse me. And then if I select this one and then come down here to my third level and click that, it's going to turn blue. Now the reason I'm doing this again is so I have I can actually see what's going on. What I would like to have happen is when I'm close to this, it's red. To see the changeover as I back away from it, I'm going to change the material of the second one to green so I can really see what's happening. And I'm going to left click in here and start to move my mouse back away from the model. And you notice it turns green. If you look right down here at the base, this is where you're going to notice the biggest difference in this model is if you zoom in, the base on this is kind of rounded. You can see the shape of this base. Well, as I back away from it, what I did was that takes a lot of memory. Again, if you look at the wireframe on that, and you really can't see those very well, but there's a lot of polygons and a lot of triangles on that base. And so what I did to make that curved, if it's straight, it's a whole lot easier to create using less polygons. So as I back away from it and it turns green, it actually becomes straight. Now this, and let me just continue on here for a moment. If I back away even further, it's going to turn blue. And that's even less polygons. There's way less polygons on that one than there is. And then as I move in, you can see if I back this far away, it's going to be blue. If I come on a little closer, it's going to turn green. And then if I get really close to it, it's going to turn red. Well, those settings are kind of wacky in terms of how far away from something you need to be. That's pretty obvious that something is changing. All right. Now, one of the things you have to think about when you're doing this and you're worried about, well, what happens when that thing changes and it looks radically different? When you're looking at an object or an asset in its own little window like this, all by its lonesome self, it's very easy to notice changes. But imagine you've modeled this thing and you've put it in an entire scene, and you have NPCs wandering around, you have buildings, you have trees, you have maybe a whole town square, and you got maybe it's like a medieval bazaar, and you have tents, and you have animals, and you have birds in the sky, and you got flags flying, and you got all kinds of things going on. All of those can distract the viewer from staring at it. In almost every case, if you're playing a game, if you pick out an object that looks like it's fairly detailed and then keep your eye on it as you start to walk away, you'll see the changeover. It's something that happens. It's just kind of the way things are. If you're staring at it, you're going to notice it. But you have to assume that a player playing your game, there are so many things to distract their field of view and what they're looking at that they may never notice that thing is actually changing on you. And it happens in every game, and you're probably really used to it. We use this a lot when we're dealing with foliage and trees and plants, because trees are huge. They're like this model. You have all the leaves and you have all the branches, and you have a highly detailed model up close. And as you get away from it and you have a whole forest of trees, you'll notice a changeover in the model. So this is just something that always happens. Now, the setting on this one is adjustable. You'll notice that's pretty close for what I'm doing here, and I would really like to have it maybe, I don't want it to turn green till about here, and I don't want it to turn blue until I get about that far away from it. So how can I actually go in and set those? All right, let's close up LOD1, LOD2, and LOD0 here just for a second. Okay, well actually let me show you here in LOD. You notice it says screen size 1. And if I open up LOD1, it says screen size 0.33. Close that, open up LOD2, the screen size is 0.16. These are the settings to determine when it's going to switch between your models. Okay? When I'm in close like this, it's assuming that it is full size. That is the screen size of 1. And as I back away from it, and it's only about a third of the size, it's down about a third of the size, it's going to jump down to the 0.33, which is the second level. And then as I back further away from it, we're down to about what was the setting on that one? 0.16. It'll switch over. But these are grayed out. do anything to them. I can't change the numbers. I can't fix those at all. And the way that we change that is going to be located down here in the LOD settings, and it's kind of hidden down here. You notice I close that thing up. Actually, it's not hidden, but it's right there. But it says auto compute. Now, in a window like this, you'll notice that things are kind of overlapped, and I can't necessarily see everything that's there. That's based off of this window. That window is resizable, and you notice as I pull it out, okay, I can start to see the entire thing. Unreal is pretty good about this. They let you see that. They also let you move these things over that way. So if you're dealing with numbers, and the numbers and the words don't have to be that big, I'll kind of keep it maybe over there like that, and I can do that. Auto compute LOD distances is check marked, so it's doing it automatically. If I uncheck that, now what happens is if I go back and open these three LODs up, now the screen size here for one, which is what I want to keep for that one, I can now change that number. If I go down to LOD2, I can change that number. And if I go down to LOD1, LOD2, the same thing. And what I'm going to do on this one is I'm actually going to go ahead and set this one first. Now, the numbers I'm going to set this to, you have to kind of test it out. And you're going to have to test it out in two ways. One is going to be here in this window. This window functions differently than the actual screen back out over here. So once I set these numbers, I'm still going to have to go and test it out, and I may have to come back and tweak these numbers just a little bit. But I've done this before, and I'm going to set this to 0.01. Okay, so it's not going to turn blue till I get clear back about there. All right, so that's 0.01. And if I zoom in, this one is still kind of iffy. That's still a little close. I'd really like it to be maybe about here. So I'm going to go up to this one, and I'm going to change that to 0.04, I think. Adjust that out. See, I get within about 30 feet of it. Maybe I'll change that a little bit. Maybe I'll make that 0.05. Yeah, that's probably pretty good right there. So I can see this full, big, heavy-duty model. As I'm walking away from it and not really paying attention to it, it'll turn to a lesser model. And then if I'm standing clear back over here, again, you've got to assume that in a crowded scene, there's going to be all kinds of things going on in through here. You really can't, that's just dropped down to the lowest possible model itself. And you can see right here, on the left-hand side, as it changes the LOD. So there's my LOD settings right there. That is 39,900 triangles. As I back away to LOD1, it is now only 3,000. That's a 1/10 of the size. Maybe about 1/11 of the size. So it's considerably smaller at this point. And then when I come away even further and get clear back out to here, it's going to drop down to about 1,200 triangles. That's actually, if I could show you the model, matter of fact, I'll do that really quick. Let me show you what that model, each of those models look like individually. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to drop this in the scene right over here just so I've got it. But then I'm going to go ahead and I'll import those two additional models just so you can see how bad those look. Okay, that's number 2. Or level D1, and that's level 2 over there. And if I apply the materials to them, you can see that's just horrible. The materials on there kind of, there we go, on that one, and then get this one applied to that. So you can see this is just terrible. It's all faceted. It looks awful. What is rounded in through this area, in through here, becomes not quite so rounded there, and not rounded at all over here. You can see the facets going around the outer rim, It just looks like it's faceted all the way around. You look over at this one, it's got more facets, but it's still faceted all the way around. And then you look at this one is nice and smooth all the way around. So this is a great way for me to show something high poly up close, and then as I back away from it, I can slowly but surely have control over what model is represented, how good it looks or how bad it looks, and I'm all set on that. So this is LODs. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you download the car models, and I'm going to have you do the same thing with those. I'm not really concerned about the textures on those. All I'm looking for is that you can do basically the same thing. You can create 4 individual, very simple materials and apply it to the different models of the car, and that's what's going to be turned in as an assignment. If you have any more questions on this one, you can look in Canvas. There is a link to the Unreal website, which will explain LODs and how they work, and basically talk about exactly the same thing I've just done here. Next time we'll be talking about materials.